Well, speaking of the difference between spreading awareness and actually doing the work, let's talk about the wildfires in the West Coast and how liberals love to talk about awareness on climate change, but they don't want to do the work. I'll intro this story. Wildfires have been ravaging the West Coast. California, Oregon, and Washington are experiencing incredibly difficult to fight wildfires. Firefighters are having a difficult time containing them. At least 15 people, for instance, have died in the fires, with more expected as teams search through burned homes. The fires have consumed more than 3 million acres in California alone, almost 1 million acres in Oregon, and destroyed entire towns in Washington. That's based on reporting from the New York Times yesterday. So I'm guessing that the amount of damage is actually much higher by today. But you guys get the picture. Every single year, California deals with wildfires, and every single year they become more widespread, more difficult to fight. And of course, this is climate change fueled. The consequences of our inability to do something about climate change, mitigate the impact of climate change, that's what this is really about. And so now you have all of these corporate Democrats who have these positions of power talking about the importance of fighting climate change when there are people in positions of power who had the ability to do something about climate change. But there's actually evidence of them going against what's necessary to combat climate change. So let's start off with one of my favorite people, Nancy Pelosi. By the way, check out Shahid Buttar, who is running against Nancy Pelosi, and I really hope he wins. She's awful. She doesn't deserve any position of power because she's feckless. She's a coward. And what you're about to see is, the rhetoric pretending to care about climate change. Let's take a look.
We have these fires in California and in the West. 16 people have died in Washington, Oregon, and California, including a firefighter and a 1-year-old baby. Our firefighters have been so very, very courageous. Now we're again breaking records. Mother Earth is angry. She's telling us, whether she's telling us with hurricanes on the Gulf Coast, fires in the West, whatever it is, that the climate crisis is real and has an impact.
She's the most powerful woman in Congress. She's the Speaker of the House. She has the ability to actually do something. She has the ability to use the bully pulpit to pressure other lawmakers into doing the right thing and passing legislation to, in the very least, mitigate the impact of climate change. But she's actually done the opposite. If you can recall, just last year, she had an interview with Politico where she was asked about the Green New Deal. Her response to that was, it will be one of several or maybe many suggestions that we receive. The Green Dream, or whatever they call it, nobody knows what it is, but they're for it, right? So, typical snarky bullshit you can expect from a feckless, cowardly member of Congress who has all the power to do what it takes, but refuses to do what it takes because, how is she going to pay for the $12,000 refrigerators, of which she needs 2 in her kitchen? I have more people to hit at, but go ahead, Nando.
No, well, I just the pose that a lot of Democratic lawmakers put when they're talking about this is kind of like a 16-year-old Twitter user, like climate change is real, pass it on, like on Twitter, and it's like, you're in positions of power, govern, please, the Alex Perrine talks about this a lot. Alex Perrine writes for the New Republic. He beyond the sort of structural critiques we may have about the Democratic Party and the people in power and they're corrupt and all that stuff, but there's also just a crisis of basic competence in that they're not even good at the sort of basic technocratic competence that in theory they could be doing. So California is a perfect example. Again, Democrats run everything in California, every major city, the governor, senators, at all levels. The vote blue, no matter who, is reality, is real in California. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are certain structural problems with the way California is set up. You talked about it when we talked about Prop 13 and how it collapsed the tax base and all that stuff. True, all that is true. But there are also things that could be done, given the current structures of power, that would help mitigate the fire crisis. There is just a basic dereliction of duty when it comes to like intentional fires and all that stuff. You know, like there could be a lot more done, but they're not doing it because they're beyond the fact that they're corrupt, feckless idiots. They're just incompetent as well. You know, which is the bare minimum that we 100%. Could ask. You know, and they're terrified of exercising power.
You know, I used to think that they were terrified of exercising power. There's some truth to that. But I also think that the, biggest influence is money, really. I mean, they're backed by fossil fuel companies. They're backed by corporations who don't want to do anything about climate change. And they listen. They listen to that. I mean, of course, because of the Reagan era, and Ryan Grimm writes about it in his book, We've Got People, I think that the Democratic Party was beaten so aggressively that there is like an element of fear. But I think that it's now devolved to a place of just corporate greed. And I just really think that's the determining factor. But let me go on to other lawmakers. And look, let me be clear about something, because every once in a while, someone will tune into this show and they'll be like, it's an election year. How can you go after Democrats in an election year? All right, let me give you guys the caveat so everyone can calm down. Republicans are trash. I hate Republicans. I hate Trump. Yes, I think we need to beat Trump. Yada, yada. You guys get that, right? But the reason why I hold Democrats accountable is because they're the ones who just pay lip service to the issues that impact our lives every day. And then behind the scenes, certainly do act like Republicans. And we need to take the trash out. That's where I'm coming from. So let's move on to Obama, who is not in power anymore, but was in power for 8 years straight. And he's very worried about these wildfires. So he's using this as an opportunity to encourage people to vote. He writes via Twitter, "The fires across the West Coast are just the latest examples of the very real ways our changing climate is changing our communities. Protecting our planet is on the ballot. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does." Nando, take it away.
Barack Obama, toward the end of his presidency, in a public event, bragged about the fact that under his watch, the United States became the largest producers of oil and gas in the world. He's like, that was me, everybody. And not to mention like all the stuff with do you remember the Dakota Access Pipeline thing that happened that no one remembers anymore, but happened under a Democratic president? I have zero patience for that kind of pose when he was the president, he was the president and he objectively, first of all, did nothing really meaningful to stop climate change, but actually did many things that would make it worse, like fomenting the oil and gas production and things like the Dakota Access Pipeline. Like, give me a break. It's infuriating.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you said everything that needs to be said about Obama, right? And it reminds me of how the Obamas now have some sort of production company.
Yeah,
and they put out
a
documentary. A documentary on Netflix about auto workers.
Oh yeah,
and it's like, this is kind of insulting.
It's so insulting.
Yeah.
It was actually a very good documentary, but
it was.
The whole time I'm thinking,
it was excellent.
It's excellent, and it really kind of gets to the heart of like the problems in our politics. But the whole time I'm thinking, like, Obama, you were the president. You could have presidents can like fly a plane and like land near that factory and be like, do something about it. Like they can get involved and help those workers in that fight. But he didn't. He would never do that.
Yeah. It was almost as if, as soon as he's done with his second term, put out that documentary. It's like, I knew all along. Just didn't do anything about it. Anyway, now let's talk about actual lawmakers in California. Governor Gavin Newsom. So Governor Gavin Newsom claims that, he's a big fighter for climate change. I'll give you the details on whether or not he is in just a minute, but here are some of his strong words this week in regard to climate deniers.
I quite literally have no patience for climate change deniers. It simply follows completely inconsistent, that point of view, with the reality on the ground, the facts as we are experiencing. You may not believe it intellectually, but your own eyes, your own experiences tell a different story.
Now, I mean, Gavin Newsom, of all people, should be very concerned about these wildfires because all that smoke is obviously screwing up his voice. But again, he's just not willing to do what it takes to combat climate change. Now, on a state level, there are things you can do. I do acknowledge that it's not just about individual states or even individual countries. We really need solidarity worldwide in order to combat this. But still, on a more local level, there are actions you can take. And Greenpeace had put out like a report card for Gavin Newsom on the topic of climate change. I'm going to read you what they gave him, like what his score is, but more importantly, what happened after this report was put out. So they write that in October of 2019, Newsom signed a bill to limit oil and gas development on state lands. On November 19th, 2019, Newsom's administration announced 3 actions to safeguard public health and the environment, advance California's goal to become carbon neutral by 2045, and manage the decline of oil production and consumption in the state. The move marks California as the first major fossil fuel producing region in the United States to seriously begin a process to manage the decline of fossil fuel production, although it remains to be seen how far these reforms will go in reducing oil and gas production. The ultimate impact of these proposed reforms is unknown, and on their own, they do not meet the level of ambition necessary to match the scale of the climate and public health crisis. So they put out that report early this year. And it's mixed, obviously. And it's the kind of like incremental change that you can expect from corporate Democrats, right? I'll take some action, but I'm not going to go so far as to anger certain donors of mine. I'm not going to do what it takes to really combat climate change. And then in July of this year, turns out that Gavin Newsom was like, oh, you want to do fracking? Here's a fracking permit, fracking permit, fracking permit. He gave out 360 fracking permits in July. Okay, that is relevant to the discussion. And so I would love to see how Greenpeace feels about Gavin Newsom's supposed leadership on climate change today, because there really isn't any.
Yeah, and watching that Gavin Newsom clip, it kind of encapsulates the problem with the liberal response to this, like, you know, like the insane kind of climate denialism that exists in the United States. It's kind of like browbeating, you know, and saying like, you just got to trust the science or whatever. And this is something that producer Kale talks about a lot, and where he's like, you know, you have to wrap this up into some sort of like emancipatory, self-interested thing for people, not like something that you have to, like, not some sort of like thing that you're foisting on people and they have to like do some sort of self-sacrifice. Like forever, like the whole thing was about recycling. You got to recycle, you got to recycle, you got to recycle. Yesterday, NPR put out a report saying that all of plastic recycling is just a giant scam, that they just take it and they burn it like as if it was any other piece of trash. You know, and like, but for decades, that was kind of the thing, is like, if everyone just took some personal responsibility and recycled, then, you know, we'll go a long way to fixing the problem. And that's just not the way to do it. You have to, you know, like, part of the promise of a Green New Deal is that that New Deal part is attached to it, you know, that it improves your housing and your healthcare and wages and good jobs and all that stuff. Like it is kind of like, it ties it to the self-interest of regular people, not just being like, did you read the latest UN climate report? You know, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, we need to stop allowing people to give us this like illusion that they're doing something just by spreading awareness. I think people know. I think people understand that climate change is real, that it's man-made. Sure, there are some fringy lunatics out there who still deny it. But when you're talking about average people, not the Koch brothers, I mean, you see it. It's right in front of your eyes. I remember traveling to Alaska, and there was like a little tour group, and I was like overhearing them. We were looking at the Mendenhall Glacier, which has receded quite a bit. And this conservative guy was like, you know, I don't want to say anything controversial, but, you know, I just keep hearing about how climate change isn't real. But I mean, just that glacier. And I like literally jumped into their conversation. I was eavesdropping. I'm not part of the group at all. And I was like, no, you should absolutely say things like this. It should not be controversial. Don't feel bad about it. You're absolutely right. your lawmakers are lying to you, basically. But yeah, we need to have more conversations like that. But when it comes to people in positions of power, they don't get brownie points for raising awareness. They only get brownie points if they sign on to something as comprehensive and necessary as the Green New Deal.
Yeah. No,
yeah,
absolutely.